In this tutorial, we are going to look at what is compound interest and how exactly it is different from the simple interest. Let's say we take a simple scenario that we borrow some money from a bank and it is $1,000 at the rate of 10% per year, right? That is our rate of interest, and this money that we borrow is for a total duration of 2 years. Okay, and the simple interest becomes a very straightforward case of multiplication of these three numbers, right? Divide by 100, and that comes out to be $200. And we also say that the amount payable is equal to the $1,000, the original money that we borrow, which is P, plus the interest that we have to pay back, 200. And that is our total money that we have to pay back, with this being the simple interest and this being the total amount payable, right? SI and the amount payable in the end. Now, essentially, if you put these things on a timeline, let's say if this is my timeline 0 to 2 years, okay, you borrow this money, which is P, you held this money for 2 years, and in the end, you add a little bit more on top of this, call this as I, right? And this becomes your total payable. That's exactly what simple interest has told us, right? And that is where compound interest works differently. What compounding does is that instead of calculating interest on this total duration of 2 years, we break down this period of loan duration into smaller chunks, and each period is called a compounding interval. That means, in addition to these basic terms of the rate of interest and the total duration of the loan, we define one more term, and that term is called compounding interval. And what we do is we calculate interest at the end of each compounding interval, and we use that much interest money to add back to the principal to recalculate interest for the next period. So let's see how it works. So let us redefine our scenario of calculation of compound interval. So in this case, my principal is 1000. The same example, rate of interest is 10% per year, and the total duration of the loan is 2 years. Okay. But in this case, I am specifying one more term, and that is called compounding interval. In this case, I'm saying that my compounding interval is annual. That means at the end of each year, I'll calculate how much is the interest, and we will reinvest that much interest back into the principal. So if this is my timeline, 0 to 2 years, compounding interval is annual. That means I break down these 2 years into two parts. Each part is equal to 1 year, right? So this is my compounding interval 1, 0 to 1, and then this is my compounding interval 2. Okay, but we need to make sure that our rate of interest, and this is a very crucial factor, the rate of interest aligns fully with the compounding interval. Now we have already been given that this rate of interest is 10% per year. So we will say that my rate of interest is 10% and 10%. Had the compounding interval been different, let's say biannual or quarterly, then we will have to adjust this rate of interest accordingly. We always align the rate of interest with our compounding interval. These two terms have to match all the time. So let's come back to the point. Say that if we were to calculate interest in each period, let's say this is my time period 1, and principal is the amount that I borrow, right? So I'm going to calculate how much is the interest due at the end of year 1, okay, and call this as I1. So I1 in this case is going to be my principal sum, which is 1000, times the rate of interest, this one, right, times the duration, 1 year only, right, divide by 100, and that gives me $100. That is my interest due at the end of year 1. We are not paying that much money yet. We have to pay all of the interest at the end of the second year, which is the loan duration, right? But what we do is we add that much interest back into the principal, okay? And that becomes 1000 plus 100, which is $1100, okay? And for all practical purposes, we are going to calculate how much is the interest due at the end of year 2, and that I2 will be calculated just the way I1 has been calculated. The only difference being my principal has changed now. Principal is A1, which is the sum of the original principal plus the interest. So I2 is calculated on A1, which is 1100 times 10, the rate of interest in this period, times 1. divide by 100 and it becomes $110. Fair enough, right? Now what is the total due at the end of year 2? The total due will be, of course, I2 plus the principal, which is A1, right? So the total due at the end of year 2 will be 1100 plus 110. That is 1210. Now keeping this in mind, you tell me how much money we have paid back as interest on this loan using this compounding thing. We have paid back is called as compound interest, which is the final paid back amount minus the real original principal that happened to be the P, right? Which is 1210 minus 1000 or $210. This is essentially different from the simple interest. So if I remember my number exactly, the simple interest on this loan was $200, right? The interest that we calculated at the end of year 1 was added back to the principal. That is why it is different, because you're calculating interest on top of interest. Okay. Now, is there a formula that instead of going by this stepwise approach, is there a formula that gives us the total amount due at the end of year 2? Yes, certainly there is, and let's take a look at that formula. So the formula for calculation of the total payable using the compound interest method is the original principal times 1 plus r by 100 to the power n. Keep in mind, this r is the rate of interest in each interval. Okay, that interval has to be aligned with the total number of intervals that we have in our compound calculation, the number of total intervals. Now in this case, when we calculate the total amount payable using the compound formula, is that we have to be extra careful in defining what is my rate of interest and the number of periods for which that rate of interest has to be applied. These two things have always to be balanced. The rate of interest has to be in the interval for which we are using this formula for. Okay, and likewise the compound interest becomes the total payable minus the original principal. Okay, so this is how you calculate the compound interest.